The Voodoo5 5500 was famous for being 3DFX's last flagship graphics card to make it to market. On the other hand, the Rage Fury MAXX was infamous for being a problematic attempt by ATI to compete against NVIDIA's first GeForce. Two totally opposite cards from a historical point of view, and yet with one intriguing similarity. They both use two 3D accelerators on a single card. So how about a battle between a pair of two-headed monsters from the year 2000? A double head-to-head, if you will. Are we going to see a heated competitive match or a lopsided bloodbath? Keep watching and find out. This is PixelPipes. Right, so this was a comparison that no one asked for. In most card battles videos so far, and in the ones planned for the future, it's about taking a second look at the performance of graphics cards that were positioned as direct rivals. But quite honestly, I don't think anyone was seriously trying to decide between these two. I mean, if you were that person, that one person that perhaps was, and you're watching this video, please leave me a comment down below because I'd love to hear about it. The Rage Fury MAXX I've already talked about. You can check out that video in the link above, but for the sake of completeness, I'll quickly go over again what's going on with this thing. So basically in late 1999, NVIDIA releases the first GeForce, and it spanks every other card on the market. ATI only had the Rage 128 Pro. Their true next generation GPU wasn't ready yet, a chip internally referred to as the Rage 6, which ATI was mulling over, maybe calling the Radium. Yeah, I'm sure that name will stick. They needed a stopgap fast and came up with the brilliant idea of slapping two Rage 128 Pros on a single card and using some driver hackery to make them work together. Foolproof! They both render every other frame, an early implementation of alternate frame rendering. But of course, neither chip were ever designed to do this, and the software RAID approach to dual chip rendering meant that any OS based on Windows NT would never be able to work with it, and very few motherboard chipsets would even put up with it. And should you get the right OS and the right chipset and make it function, what was the game support like? So the Voodoo5! Now this is how you do it. The Voodoo5 5500 was released several months later and sported two brand new VSA 100 chips. What did VSA stand for, you ask? Well, Voodoo Scalable Architecture, of course. Yeah, that's right, this chip was conceived from the ground up to be multi-chip scalable, and it sported special engineering to be able to do that. Each chip had a 30-bit wide direct connection to other chips, and 3DFX touted that it could scale all the way up to 32 chips, which as far as I know was never shown in a working product. However, the Voodoo5 6000, which was notoriously cancelled right before launch, did have 4 chips working on a single card. And 3DFX's workstation spin-off company, Quantum 3D, also had 8 of them working on a single freaking-mongous card. This was an evolution of 3DFX's SLI technology introduced with the Voodoo 2, a method in which each chip splits the rendering load every other horizontal line of pixels, and the company was already experienced with that idea. I plan to do a video dedicated to the Voodoo5 5500 later on, but I'll just say this right up front, the multi-chip rendering technology of that card is the most seamless, flawless implementation I've ever seen. If you just watched a game being rendered on this card and you weren't told what it was, you wouldn't even know it was dual chip. There's no micro stuttering, there's no weird rendering artifacts or issues. This card just works like a single card, and as you'll see in a moment, there's virtually no game that doesn't utilize both chips. It really is that amazing. So this should be a fair fight, right? Let's talk about specs for a moment. Each card has 64 megabytes of memory split between both of their chips, with a 128-bit memory bus dedicated to each. Since data has to be mirrored across both chips, that effectively means you only have half of that memory available, just like with modern SLI and Crossfire. At the last second, I managed to find another Rage Fury MAXX, this one an earlier model from 1999, made in Canada with jumpers and a socketed BIOS. The clocks are higher than my 2000 model, at 125 MHz core and 143 MHz memory, in line with review samples of the time, so I retested everything with this new, older card. The Voodoo5 is clocked at 166 MHz for both the cores and memory. Both cards feature dual pixel pipelines in each chip, with one texture unit per pipe. Before we begin, let me get the disclaimer out of the way. This is PixelPipes, and on this channel we test graphics cards with incorrect, overpowered CPUs and newer and possibly controversial drivers than were available at the time of launch, in order to evaluate each card's true potential in the hopes of learning something new about them. For this comparison, our testbed is using Windows 98 SE because we don't really have a freaking choice, and our processor is a Barton-based Athlon XP-2400 Plus mobile overclocked to 2.4 GHz. Check out the video description below for the full details. In 3D Mark 99, you can see that it's really no contest. The Fury MAXX is ahead? Wow. Maybe this might be a more interesting fight than I thought. As you can see, the Voodoo5 is actually ahead by quite a bit in single chip mode, but then falls short of the, well, frankly unexplainable rise of performance for the Rage Fury MAXX in dual chip mode. An increase of 141%. Hang on, that can't be right. Huh. Well, actually, there is something weird going on here. Take a look at the difference between the frame rate Fraps is reporting and the one in the benchmark. 3D Mark is recording a way higher frame rate than what Fraps reports, especially in the first test. This is very strange, and I'm almost tempted to call this driver cheating, but I don't have much to go on. Obviously, it shouldn't be physically possible for the Fury MAXX to perform more than twice as fast with dual chips enabled, aside from some sort of software issue. 3D Mark 2000 was the standard of the time, and the one reviewers would use. As you can see, the performance is much more realistic this time, and the Voodoo5 does get a slight edge. That being said, the Fury MAXX is still reaching slightly above 100% scaling, which is again an unbelievable performance increase. The Voodoo5 actually only increases performance by 48.5% here. 3D Mark 01 is beyond the point at which the drivers for either card would see any optimizations. Both cards exhibit some minor rendering errors, but they both show a respectable increase in performance of over 70% from single to dual chip rendering. The Voodoo5 is the victor here by a few hundred points. Now, Quake III is an interesting one. As you can see, the Voodoo5 handily wins this round by 68% over the Fury MAXX in dual chip mode. The numbers are actually pretty comparable in single chip mode, but the MAXX just doesn't get the same amount of scaling, and this doesn't even tell the whole story. While I haven't figured out how to get 1% low numbers in Windows 98, I can tell you that the Fury MAXX has horrible stuttering issues in this game. I talked about it before, but now I can actually show you with direct feed capture. The stuttering varies quite a bit from run to run, but it's never smooth, and as you can see in this footage, the two chips are so out of sync it's literally shaking the screen side to side as I move. If the frame rate goes above your monitor's refresh, you don't see this, so in theory, if you lower the resolution enough, this won't be a problem. But then you could just run the game with one chip disabled. Reviewers never complained about this, so I can only imagine this behavior might vary from platform to platform. Unreal Tournament shows a very close match here, and once again the Fury MAXX shows better dual chip scaling than the Voodoo5, such that its poor results with single chip rendering grow to have a very slight edge with both chips hammering away. This game can also exhibit some minor stuttering on the MAXX, but that's only if you exceed the limits of the 32 MB frame buffer with a resolution that's too high. If you keep it to 1024 by 768 like I did for this test, it's actually very smooth and enjoyable. Good job, MAXX. Unreal Tournament does support glide mode, but I wanted this to be an apples to apples comparison. Besides, glide usually only supports 16-bit color rendering. That is, unless you go into the driver and select this option to force 32-bit color, and there is a performance hit when doing so, which shows that it works. And so, because I know someone's going to ask, here are the results with this setting, and as you can see, the 5500 grows an additional 44% faster, which is like enabling a third imaginary VSA 100. And yeah, at this setting it's completely untouchable. New to the testing suite is a childhood favorite of mine, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, and now we see the Rage Fury spotty game support rear its ugly head. Unless they got lucky, like with 3D Mark 2001, ATI had to manually tune their driver for every game, and with limited resources, not every game got their attention, and this is a perfect example of that. The Voodoo 5 shows tremendous scaling here, and it's an absolute silky joy to play this game on that card. Even its single chip score is higher, and that's with the Fury MAXX failing to render distant fog properly. And here's another racing game with great scaling on the Voodoo 5 and zero scaling on the Fury MAXX, and because of that, the Voodoo 5 handily beats it in dual chip mode. The single chip score is almost identical between them, which means had the alternate frame rendering been functional, the MAXX might have matched or even exceeded the Voodoo 5 as it often scales better. Next we have Expendable, and the performance here is neck and neck, with the MAXX getting just a couple more frames in dual chip mode over the Voodoo 5, but single chip scores are essentially identical. In Slave Zero, we switched over to the demo version of the game this time to get around the issues with the GOG version. This is the one time where the Voodoo 5 actually had more issues, because when choosing 32-bit color mode, it could only render the 2D elements of the game. In 16-bit color mode, you can see it does output more frames than the Fury MAXX, though the scaling is honestly disappointing on the Voodoo. The Fury MAXX would be the preferable choice just for being able to run 32-bit mode without dithering. And for our final test, we're going way newer than these cards would normally allow for, and as you can see, the Fury MAXX shows virtually no improvement running with both chips. In fact, it's a downgrade as it introduces horrible stuttering much like in Quake 3, whereas the Voodoo 5, even with drivers predating the game, actually scales almost 100% to allow for somewhat playable frame rate. An astounding feat, even though we're running at a very low 800 by 600 resolution here. And just like that, the Battle of the Beast is over. The city may have been decimated, but at least we have performance results, and in PixelPipes land, that's all that truly matters. To be honest, I never expected this to be such an exciting match. In fact, I wrote the first part of this video before doing any of my testing, fully expecting the Rage Fury MAXX to get slaughtered. But then the results came in, and yeah, the Voodoo 5 5500 gets faster results in 8 out of the 10 tests, but only 5 of those were decisive wins, including the one where I tested the Glide API. The rest of the time, the MAXX put up a good fight, and I have some thoughts as to why that might be. On paper, the Voodoo 5 should never lose. It's clocked higher than the Fury MAXX, and because it uses scanline interleave for its dual chip rendering, each chip only has to render half the horizontal resolution, which means less load on the ROPs and less data in the frame buffer, and thus better memory bandwidth utilization. But the Voodoo 5 often showed inferior scaling going from single chip rendering, and the reason for that may come down to one critical weakness. As mentioned in an article from 2017 by PC Games Hardware, the Voodoo 5 may support AGP2X, same as the Fury MAXX, but internally each chip communicates with each other via a AGP1X or PCI 66 equivalent. In many scenarios, the frame rate is going to be somewhat capped because of this limitation. The Voodoo 5 is also a much longer card and requires an external Molex connector. In practical terms, it may not fit in every system, but if we're talking about practicality compared to the Rage Fury MAXX, it's no contest. The Voodoo 5 may require AGP 3.3 volt compatibility minus an exceptionally rare 4x AGP version that you'll never find, but at least it works with nearly every chipset on the market. For even more compatibility and a whole lot more money, you can even find PCI versions, though they do incur a performance hit. The Rage Fury MAXX is a diva of a graphics card, needing a specific set of motherboard chipsets, a limited set of operating systems, and even with that, sometimes you need a specific AGP GART driver. And then some games still won't utilize both rendering chips. The Rage Fury MAXX is also legitimately rare and can routinely fetch prices beyond $100. The standard Voodoo 5 5500 is not rare, but you have to pay the 3D Effects collector tax, which means it often costs way more than the Fury MAXX. For that reason, I don't consider either card practical choices for someone just wanting to get into some Windows 98 gaming. But for the passionate folks out there with disposable income, they might be worth the hurdles. As for which card I personally like more, well, it's easily the Voodoo 5 5500. The Fury MAXX will always be a fascinating card for various reasons, but the Voodoo 5 is a special card in graphics card history and is much more enjoyable to use. That's it for this episode of Card Battles. If you enjoyed it, please let me know down in the comments, and as always, look forward to more in the future. Thanks for watching. I'm Nathan, and this has been PixelPipes.